Hello, Monika. Hello, Isaku. Can you hear me well?
Yes,
Hello,
Teeraporn.
Teeraporn. Yes.
Well.
I think we can start. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Monika Stankiewicz. I'm Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention Mercury, and I would like to very warmly welcome the panelists and all participants to the session on multimedia modeling of global Mercury movement. Please note that this event is being recorded, and we will make the recording available on the Minamata website afterwards. The session is part of the Minamata Online, the new digital series of events under the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and more specifically, its trend on Mercury and science. For the Mercury and science trend, the Secretariat has been cooperating with the International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant, a world-renowned annual conference to advance science on Mercury and its use in policymaking. And this specific session on multimedia modeling is also co-organized with the Global Mercury Partnership. The partnership was instrumental before the convention was created and entered into force in 2017 and continues to be a major platform of stakeholders to support implementation of the convention in the concrete way. The convention has 125 parties, and new countries have just announced that they are joining the convention, and this shows interest and commitment of global community to addressing transboundary problem of mercury. And I would like to take this opportunity and express my appreciation to both partners, International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant and the Global Mercury Partnership, for supporting our efforts to keep this momentum and to collaborate online in innovative and hopefully engaging way. I would like now to introduce our distinguished panelists for today. We have Ms. Teeraporn Wiriwutikorn, co-chair of Global Mercury Partnership Advisory Group, Mr. Nicola Pirrone, Research Director, CNR Institute of Atmospheric Pollution Research from Italy, Mr. David Evers, Executive Director and Chief Scientist of Biodiversity Research Institute, Mr. Oleg Travnikov, Senior Scientist and Project Leader from the European Monitoring and Evaluation Program of the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, Mr. Nkanisto Mbata, doctor from the University of Zululand from South Africa, and Ms. Elsie Sunderland Gordon McKay, Professor of Environmental Chemistry from Harvard University. Very much appreciated from my side and from my colleagues' side that you can join us today and present. And the session will be moderated by my colleague Asa Kutoda, a Senior Program Management Officer from the Secretariat. As many who have been working on the convention know, the convention recognizes the importance of science and its practical application in the number of its articles. There is one important article 19, which is very rich in substance, and it solely focuses on research, development, and monitoring. And it provides, among others, that the parties shall endeavor to cooperate to develop and improve modeling and monitoring of levels of mercury in the environment and in humans, taking into account the country's respective circumstances and capabilities. And such cooperation, modeling, and monitoring will also greatly contribute to the effectiveness evaluation of the convention under Article 22, including its future iterations. And this session is one opportunity to facilitate such cooperation between parties, scientific community, and other stakeholders, and overall with the aim to strengthen the linkage between the science and policy. Now I have a pleasure to invite Ms. Teeraporn Wiriwutikorn, the co-chair of the Global Mercury Partnership Advisory Group, for her opening remarks. And I would like to wish everyone a really good and fruitful discussion during this session today. Thank you so much, and over to you, Ms. Wiriwutikorn. Thank you. Please unmute yourself. I think you've forgotten to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Monika, for your introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. On behalf of the co-chairs of the Global Mercury Partnership Advisory Group, I would like to warm welcome all of you to the Minamata Online session on Mercury side multimedia modeling of global Mercury movement, which is co-organized by the Minamata Convention Secretariat and UNEP, the Global Mercury Partnership and International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant, ICMGP. In the meantime, we are under the development of the effectiveness evaluation scheme for the Minamata Convention. This an appropriate time to review necessary to in doing so, in particular the atmospheric and multimedia modeling and their application. Therefore, today's session aims to link the scientific and policy aspects together that multimedia modeling covering air, water, biota, and human provides for assessing the state of the environment and the effectiveness of the Minamata Convention. I wish we will have a good discussion on the matter today, and this create a little step that our Global Mercury Partnership Area on Mercury air transport and freight research can contribute to such further work on the effectiveness evaluation of the Minamata Convention as a part of our commitment to protect human health and the global environment from the release of mercury and its compounds, as well as to work closely with stakeholders to assist in the timely ratification and effective implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. Thank you very much. And I think today we will have a fruitful discussion and initiate the further work on the effectiveness evaluation of the Minamata Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Teeraporn, for your very kind words. And with that, I'd like to start the substantive session of this Minamata Online session. And I will serve as a timekeeper during the presentation sessions, and the panel discussion session will be moderated by Dave, who is one of the co-chairs of the freight and transport area of the Global Mercury Partnership. Just housekeeping remarks. As Monika already said, this session is recorded, and the recording will be made available on the website. And also, we are going to post the PDF version of the presentation slides. You will see a Q&A box on your right-hand side, or you can activate it by clicking the relevant icon, and you can put your questions in the Q&A box already while listening to the presentations, and these questions will be dealt with in the panel discussion session. There is a functionality of oral intervention, but we are not sure whether we can use that function, because in previous sessions we only had time to handle the written questions. And to the panelists, we, as agreed, we would like to ask you to limit your presentation to 5 minutes. And when it passes 5 minutes, you will hear something like this one. So if you hear this, please wrap up as quickly as possible. So with that, I'd like to invite Nicola, who's the other co-chair of the freight and transport area. Nicola, floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Isaku. Thank you, Monika. Good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, I will try to provide some key point in 5 minutes, I hope. And first of all, freight and transport partnership. I'd like to, point out that this partnership was created in 2006. I'm chairing it since 2007. In the last 7-8 years, David Evers joined as co-chair. And this partnership has been contributing a lot in the policymaking process, including the last GMA report that was prepared for the COP3. And so our goal is really to have an inclusive strategy for cooperation among different projects and programs ongoing worldwide. Next slide, please. Well, I took these questions that we are discussing as part of the guideline on monitoring, what is needed really in terms of monitoring. And so these questions I took from Terry Keating that is part of the group, and just to highlight that the atmosphere is the first step in bringing mercury emission from point sources to receptor that can be ecosystem or biological endpoint, both in marine and terrestrial ecosystem. As you can see, what is asked to atmospheric scientists is really to understand how this mercury is released from sources, what type of mercury is present in the environment, what gets to the receptor, if we have trends, if we can detect the trends over time to specific processes or sources. And so, as you can see, it's quite complex, but something is for sure that most of the mercury releases from anthropogenic sources get to terrestrial and aquatic receptor through the atmospheric deposition processes. And so next slide, please. So this is just to give you a picture of what are the three main compartments, air, water, and sediment, and different processes involved, and how this can get to the biological endpoint that finally can impact on human health and different biota types. And so the atmospheric component, as you can see, can transfer to, there are different mechanisms that includes wet and dry deposition, but also re-emission from terrestrial and the oceanic system, and different processes involved in the water and sediment. But you will hear more about this by colleagues in the next talks. Next slide, please. So what we have done in the last few years is really to put together the state-of-the-art in the framework of the Group on Earth Observation. There is, as most of you may know, there is a flagship dedicated to Mercury, aiming to support the policy process and all interested parties. And in this flagship, what we have done is to put the state-of-the-art tool together in an interoperable fashion in order to co-design policy scenario using available observational data in order to assess different scenario of policy implementation and how effective this scenario can be. Next slide, please. So in the last GMA and also follow-up activity, also as part of the effectiveness evaluation activity, we have been reviewing available monitoring data in situ primarily, available for the Minamata Convention. And we have different programs, different network at the global scale, regional scale. So, and we have seen and highlighted in the last GMA that there are quite significant geographical gaps in terms of monitoring capability. As you can see, Africa, several parts of Asia, Latin America, and this there is an effort, ongoing effort to fill these gaps with passive air samplers. Next slide, please. So what we do with observational data is really to test atmospheric model, not only model, atmospheric model, but then to feed this output in terms of atmospheric deposition to ocean and terrestrial ecosystem, to a number of marine biochemical model, and also to feed the trophic transfer model. So our ultimate goal is to link emission to point the diffuse sources that release mercury to the atmosphere to mercury bioaccumulation to biological endpoint that can impact on human health at the end. So what we have done for the atmospheric part, please, next slide, please, is really to promote, and we have been promoting the use of different global scale models. You see here listed the 4 major global scale models in use in different groups worldwide, and have been promoted several intercomparison. I'm sure that Oleg Travnikov will talk about this in different European and not only a European program. And in order to provide different scenario in terms of deposition, in terms of changing also emission inventory, because there are several emission inventory available with the strengths and weaknesses, each of them. So there is a lot of work ongoing to assess the uncertainty in our modeling evaluation, but a lot of work has been done in terms of intercomparison of models. Next slide, please. So what we have done in the framework of the GEO with the contribution of different partners is to develop a user-oriented tool that can be used to analyze different emission scenarios. And so you can get how much Mercury can really get to the biological endpoint, the end. But this, of course, is ongoing work. So next slide, please. So this is typical, is a type of output that you can get. So you can do tagging of mercury release from different sources and region. So you can have a mass balance on that. But next slide, please. So what are the source of uncertainty? Where we are up to now? What we need to work more in order to reduce the uncertainty when we assess atmospheric deposition pattern? Certainly, we know not much about artisanal small-scale gold mining in terms of emission, in terms of long-range transport, in terms of deposition pattern at their impact area, the geographical coverage. Another important point is the ocean. So re-emission, what is the role of re-emission? How much is the uncertainty associated with this? And then another important source is forest fires. So the occurrence type and so on, different processes. So this deserves a lot of attention in the near future to ensure that uncertainty is well evaluated. Next slide. So we have done some simulation for SGM as promised. So we have seen that in the tropics, most of the mining are in the tropic area. This is ongoing work from Ian Ashcock and other people in my institute. So you can see, depending on this condition, next slide, we have considered different mining. This is a mine in Senegal, still in the tropic area. In this case, you can have quite a large impact of the emission. But in other cases, you can have a local impact, a strictly local impact. Next slide. So you have another one that is in Kalimantan. So you can see that depending on the meteorological condition and considering non-convective rainfall, you can see, this type of behavior. So the impact of SGM in terms of emission, in terms of deposition, deserve a lot of attention in the future assessment. I think that was the last slide. And thank you for your attention. We can discuss later on about all this.
Thank you, Nicola. And the issues that you raised in the last slides, the SGM is, I hear that you're planning another event, and we, as a secretariat, would be very interested in joining forces. So thank you, Nicola. And then I'd like to invite David, the co-chair of the Air and Transport area. David, floor is yours.
Thank you, Asako. It's good to be here with everybody and share a little bit of the world of biota mercury concentrations. Next slide, Tak. There has been a lot of effort and work to pull together a lot of the mercury biotic concentrations that are available in the published literature. Some of that information, a lot of the information was pulled together for the last COP3 with this UN report on the left side. And it represents a global biotic mercury synthesis database, or GBIMS. And in that database, it represents taxa, or organisms, from Article 19. There's fish, sea turtles, birds, and marine mammals, so it's very specific. We've pulled data from peer-reviewed publications, nearly 1,400 different references. And they represent locations of over 3,400 places in the world. And it represents over 760,000 data points. And you can see in the table that we've split these data up into ocean basins and continents. Next slide. And so what this looks like on a map, something like this. And so this is just the beginning of trying to understand how mercury and biota are distributed around the world. Again, this is based on the peer-reviewed scientific literature. So it's a good place to start. A lot of the unpublished data, national data, are not included in this sort of map. So that is a next step that needs to be taken. But this is a very good start to understand spatial patterns and what we have in front of us. And the different symbols represent different taxa or organisms. The different colors represent different risk levels. And the risk levels for biota can be well understood based on thresholds of impact. And the thresholds of impact usually have outputs such as reproductive success outcomes. Next slide. And a lot, if you're wondering, how can all these data be put together, all these different organisms, how do we understand that, look at that, and have some sort of standardized way of understanding mercury in organisms? And this is one way of just putting the organisms in a table based on the different biomes. There's 4 biomes that we've identified that we can bin the data. Arctic tundra, boreal forests and taiga, temperate mixed forests, and tropical rainforests. And then there's associated aquatic systems with those continents. And then there's ecological health bioindicators and human health bioindicators. And the red square showcases, if you really want to narrow this down, there starts to come out that or reveal that there's different biota that are prime indicators for us to use for different biomes, for human health purposes, and we can start to really target in on certain biota. And those biota usually represent trophic level 4 organisms if we want to look at worst case scenarios for human health concerns. But there may be other objectives where we do want to look at lower trophic level organisms to look at temporal trends, for example. Next slide. So how do all these biota really fit into modeling purposes and interests that we all have? And the one handoff is a challenging one for linking air and biota mercury. Those concentrations in biota are challenging to relate to air deposition, mostly because there's a lot of biogeochemistry and food web dynamics that are in between what happens of mercury hitting the ground or the waterscape and how that flows up into the food web, especially when we're trying to look at higher trophic level organisms. One model that we can develop, and I'll talk about a little bit, is ecosystem sensitivity and how mercury input is impacted by what is in the ecosystem. And third is a model on mercury and dietary items, and that can be modeled, for example, fish mercury or other methylmercury concentrations in food items can be related to human exposure. Next slide. So ecosystem sensitivity models, we can look at this globally, and we can look at it for certain countries. I just chose Indonesia as one country that we're conducting work in right now. It has a lot of ASGM activities, and by looking at watersheds and using a model that would include percent forest cover, percent agriculture, percent wetlands, soil type, and then the contamination sources, we could start to get an idea what are the priority parts of the landscape or waterscape that we're most interested in. And then on the left side are data that we have in the database already and how they can compare to data for that area. So we can start to calibrate these models as well. Next slide. And then my last slide, just to get a feeling for how fish and human mercury exposure relate. Mercury concentrations in fish and other organisms that we eat can be pulled together with, and it's a trade-off with omega-3s. By looking at this within these sort of cells that we have here, you can see there's riskier choices versus healthier choices, and the mercury concentrations that we gather from this GBIMS database can be put into something like this to give us a better idea of categorically how people can fit in with the no mercury concentrations in the food items that they eat. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. for keeping in the time. Then I'd like to invite the next speaker, Oleg, who has led the work on the modeling in the most recent global Mercury assessment. Oleg, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Eisaku. Okay. So I'll say a few words about Mercury atmospheric modeling and its potential use for policy support. Next slide, please. I would like to start with a short introduction on what chemical transport models are. Generally speaking, these are scientific numerical instruments aiming at assessment of dispersion and cycling of various chemical substances in the environment. And to simulate this transport, they consider one or more environmental media like atmosphere, the ocean, land, and so on. But I mostly focus on atmospheric models, leaving the discussion on the multimedia aspects for another presentation of this session given by Elsie Sunderland later. So the models tend to simulate various processes which important for estimates of transport and fate in the environment, which include emissions from anthropogenic natural legacy sources and transport chemical transformations, deposition, or air surface exchange. Next, please. There are a good number of existing chemical transport models developed and used by different institutions for simulation of Mercury on different scales, starting from global to local scales. And most of them are atmospheric models, but a few models also couple the atmosphere with other media like the ocean, soil, and so on. Next one. A few words about what Mercury CTMs are used for. Commonly, the models are applied for reconstruction of special patterns and temporal trends of Mercury concentration deposition levels, and also to interpret observations for process studies, source apportionment in terms of source-receptor relationships, and hindcasting of historic and forecasting future Mercury levels. Next one. I'll give just a couple of examples of Mercury modeling used for policy support. The first one is a regional application of Mercury modeling within the UNEP Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, where modeling results together with the measurements are used for analysis of many aspects of Mercury pollution, including analysis of special and temporal trends, assessment of transboundary transport of Mercury between the countries, and also evaluation of critical loads exceedances. Next slide, please. Another example is a multi-modal assessment of Mercury transport and fate for the recent Global Mercury Assessment 2018. And a number of 4 models were involved in this study, and it allowed to make a broader conclusions on uncertainties of modeling results. First of all, it showed that multimodal simulations demonstrate better performance in comparison to single models. Then dry deposition estimates are more uncertain than wet deposition, mostly because of absent or lack or limited number of dry deposition measurements. The models also show good agreement on estimates of Mercury deposition from anthropogenic sources, but their estimates of contribution of natural and legacy sources show quite large contribution and very uncertain. Next one, please. So I'd like to point out that any modeling results contain uncertainties, and in terms of, in the case of Mercury atmospheric modeling, the key uncertainties include incomplete understanding of Mercury oxidation reduction chemistry, Also, uncertainties of anthropogenic emissions. First of all, chemical speciation and emissions from some specific sectors like artisanal small-scale gold mining. Also, high uncertainty of natural and legacy emissions data. And in more wider sense, uncertainty of air surface exchange fluxes. And in addition, there are some limitations of Mercury models. They are currently unable to make long-term projections on the scales of decades or centuries if they don't take into account the late response of other media like the ocean and soil. And they also cannot be directly used for exposure analysis just because there is no direct link between the common modeling results like simulated air concentration or deposition to effect on biota and human health. Next one, please. And finally, what could be the further steps for improvement of modeling results? So I think we need to develop further multimedia abilities of Mercury transport models to extend their applications. The monitoring networks of Mercury should be further developed and improved just to make measurements global, space-aided multimedia. It sounds challenging, but I think it is quite important, not only for also for their development. There is also need for updates of emissions data, speciation, of course, and also for projections of future emissions. And the process studies should be continued just to improve our understanding of the key processes. And that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg. So the next speaker is Nicola, and we talked to the executive committee of the ICMGP that is going to be held in Cape Town next year. No, the year in 2 years, and we Nicola was recommended for presenting at this session. So, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Myself and my other researchers from Cape Point in Cape Town, in the global watch station, global atmospheric watch station, we came together and thought we should start looking at atmospheric modeling of Mercury over South Africa, a skill that we really need, and that could also extend to other African countries. As we know that these are some of the things that we lack here in Africa. We already saw the map. We have a lot of gaps. And next slide, please. And here we have a very unique problem with a lot of coal mining activity happening in the north of the country. You will see over that map there in Pretoria, the brownish colors there indicate the coal deposits, and that area there is where you have a very high activity of coal mining and coal-powered stations. And also we have a lot of townships around there, very congested townships where people also use coal for energy and stuff. So it's important for us to sort of start looking into details about this Mercury. We also have a lot of mining activities happening there, and Mercury is not on the problem we have. We have a lot of SO2 and O2 and all those things that we see. So we thought that let's come and let's have a permanent, maybe small group that will start looking at Mercury modeling. We have already started. We should acknowledge our friends from Germany who started to sort of having a conversation with us to sort of start this study. And we are actually one of the largest contributors to total global Mercury emissions, if you know. Then next slide, please. And if I talk about the power stations that we have, you'll notice there around Gauteng in the north, those already triangles there, those are coal-fired power stations. We have another one further north, which is getting bigger and bigger. And of course, note that you don't want to think of having more of these power stations, but you want to consider renewable energy and stuff like that. So it's important now start to have these conversations within Africa and start to talk about some of these activities and some of the concentrations of mercury that we have, and get the consumption of coal here in South Africa. You will see most of it is used for electricity generation and other activity in domestic use. As I said, we have a lot of townships around that Highveld area there where you have those power stations. We also use this for whatever purpose. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the only thing that happened, which is very important for us, is this nice report on modeling of atmospheric mercury. They use WAF. Important researchers from Italy, and we want to say this was 2013 and 2014, but it stopped there. So once you have people who are continuing this type of studies here, who also are willing to extend it into other African countries, then you will have a better situation in terms of modeling of mercury and also measuring of atmospheric mercury. So these guys did a total deposition, and they also did a nice time series analysis of mercury, especially over that hotspot where they are coal-fired power stations, and they did deposition according to climate zones, because we have different climate zones here, and of course the distribution of mercury will depend on the wind directions and then on circulation and all that, and stuff like that. And also they did local and local transport of the contribution to of transport of mercury. So this is the type of work that we want to take forward and sort of have our continuous modeling of mercury in looking at this view. So we do not have a cap, we do have a starting point, and this is where we are starting with our own meaning. Next slide, please.
So I think your voice was cutting, so I think it's better that you switch off your video.
Hello? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you now, but your voice cuts from time to time. So I think it's better to switch off your video, outgoing video, to save the bandwidth.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
So and then this, as I said, that nice report did a very nice analysis of. You will see that strong peak of mercury in that Highveld area there, and they did a very nice time series analysis of mercury there, and we need to take this and go backward and also go to the later years and look at mercury and do continuous modeling of mercury here, and you'll note that indeed that mining dominated area is contributing more mercury in the atmosphere over South Africa. We'll also create a similar type of domain, or we already have created this, and we are just continuing with developing our own several experiments of Gscam and stuff like that. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we do have ground-based measurement of mercury already, as some of you may know, and our aim is to extend this also to Africa. We have several stations that we are doing with the guys from Global Atmospheric Watch Station in Cape Point, South African Weather Services, and from here we definitely can go to other countries as well. But the nice thing about modeling mercury is that you don't need all this expensive monies to close all the gaps that we have. As long as you have several stations, you can go for it. So let's go to I think the last slide, or second last slide. Okay, so these are the stations that are recently added, and some the ones that are operational, especially the Cape Point one, which is long-term data set and stuff like that. So we'll use these stations to compare our modeled observations. Let's go to the next slide. So our what we are doing right now, we already started using WAF here. We did several experiments using MAF, and then now we put in the chemistry module, and we will be doing that. And you can compare the data with other stations. As we have seen, those stations are starting to take the data now. We already have access to Center for High Performance Computing, because this is what we need. Otherwise, we end up running very small experiments. And then we plan to extend this to Congo and other countries. As you know, that there's a lot of activities happening in terms of atmospheric pollution in Congo and so on. And we hope that we will have some of the guys attending these meetings coming to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkaniso. And it is very encouraging to hear about the developments in the modeling and monitoring efforts in developing countries, because in the work towards the effectiveness evaluation, monitoring and modeling gap was identified, and we will need to make efforts to close the gap. So I would like now to invite the last speaker, LZ, who will contribute greatly to the work of the effectiveness evaluation ad hoc group in preparation for the COP3 as a modeling expert. LZ, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Asaku, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I just wanted to focus the discussion a little bit looking forward and thinking about what capabilities we have for quantifying the relationship between changes in atmospheric mercury releases and deposition associated with the Minamata Convention, and then its goal to protect human health and the environment. So really we're thinking about linking number 1 in this diagram to number 7 to human exposure. And I hope this provides a bit of brief context for where we are in terms of modeling capabilities right now. So to start, I just want everyone to think about the steps in the pathway of the mercury cycle that lead to human exposure. So we've heard a lot about emission sources and deposition, and we know that our atmospheric modeling capacity right now is quite robust. And by robust, I mean we have multiple modeling platforms available on the international scale. And as Oleg described, we can then do model intercomparisons and assess our uncertainty. And the question I think we're thinking about moving forward is how do we develop that same robustness or capability on a global scale, where we have these terrestrial models, ocean fate and transport, and then models for uptake in the food web and ultimately human exposure. So next slide, please. So the reason we need this multimedia modeling capability, I hope, is illustrated by this diagram, which is showing you a fully integrated biogeochemical model looking at what happens to a pulse of mercury released to the atmosphere and where it travels over time. So you can see that the mercury distributes in the atmosphere quite quickly, and then over months, years, decades, and centuries, it travels through different compartments in the terrestrial environment. And of course, that's the pathway whereby we see freshwater fish exposures and terrestrial ecosystem exposures. And you see it also a large pulse through the subsurface ocean, where we think is the dominant location for methylmercury formation in the ocean, which leads to accumulation in large pelagic species like tuna. And of course, when we release mercury to the environment, where we hope it goes is that gray compartment. So that's when it becomes sequestered and removed from actively cycling in the environment, where it can adversely affect humans and biota. So we need this kind of coupling of the modeling frameworks to understand the timescales of response to changes in emissions, and also the magnitude of exposures and the contributions from both current and past sources, as has been alluded to by other speakers. So next slide, please. So I wanted to, in the next few slides, just give you, and this is not a comprehensive list of all the modeling that's going on, but just a sense of some of the tools that we have available and some of the different groups. And this is why I believe that we have this capability emerging now in the science and in the literature. And what we're working toward is having a sufficiently robust set of tools that we can do the kinds of intercomparisons internationally as we see for the atmospheric modeling. So you've already heard in some of the other presentations about the Gscam atmospheric model, which was originally developed at Harvard. It's been used extensively by MIT. A lot of our trainees and postdocs have gone on to establish their own research groups whereby they're using this modeling platform and some of the tools that we've developed. We have Gscam presently coupled to a mechanistic global terrestrial model called the Global Terrestrial Mercury model, and also the MIT Gscam, which is an ocean GCM, which includes an ecological simulation. And that model includes now ocean fate and transport, re-emissions, methyl mercury production and uptake into food webs. It doesn't currently include pelagic fish, but that's something that's being developed as we move forward. And so you get a sense of some of the different groups from this slide as well. So there are groups at Harvard and MIT across North America, including Canada. So at UBC, several groups in China are now using Gscam, and also in Australia. So next slide, please. So parallel modeling efforts are going on in other areas of the international community. So you heard from Oleg on his atmospheric modeling efforts, but of course, the GLIMOS framework is also being extended to develop multimedia modules, which includes thinking about the long-term accumulation that I showed you earlier, and evaluation across other media. So next slide, please. Another example of a multimedia modeling framework that was developed at Stockholm University by Asif Qureshi during his PhD, and he's now located in India and still building on this work, is the WORM3 multimedia Mercury model. This is based on a very well-established modeling framework called the BETTER model, which has been used in the Stockholm Convention for POPs quite extensively. And so this is another example of a modeling framework that we have available to do these kinds of multimedia assessments. Next slide, please. In Germany, and in collaboration with Nicola's work on Gas4M, we see a lot of work going on in the area of multimedia environmental modeling, and you can read about some of that on the Gas4M website. This work is including many efforts right now to develop quite detailed marine mercury cycling models, including speciation and including methylation and uptake into the food web. So this is another effort that will again contribute to these robust international platforms. Next slide, please. And we've also seen quite a bit out of the Canadian environmental modeling framework. So again, you heard from Oleg on the atmospheric component of this work out of Environment and Climate Change Canada. They've also coupled their atmospheric simulation to an ocean model that includes methyl mercury formation. And you can see a figure from a paper they published in 2017 on this slide. And so I understand that this is not a major priority for Environment and Climate Change Canada moving forward, but they do have some initial capabilities, and I think that's something that we could encourage as we think about developing these capabilities for effectiveness evaluation. And so next slide, please. And so just to wrap up, and of course, this hasn't been an inclusive view of all the capabilities. I know there are other frameworks available in different groups in China and Japan, but I hope you got a sense that there is this emerging capability for modeling the multimedia global cycle of mercury. And there are many examples that in the peer-reviewed literature the focus for many groups right now is on the marine cycle. I haven't talked much, and perhaps we can touch on this in the discussion, about the links to marine fish and ecosystem scale biotic endpoints and human populations, because to some extent this requires site-specific data, but I think this is also possible as we move forward with these efforts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elsie, and thank you to all the presenters who made a very enlightening speech talks about the how we can understand the movement of mercury in the environment and including human exposure. So now we have 40 minutes for discussion, and I think it is this is a record number in a Mercury Online session. So now I'm handing over to Dave to moderate the discussion session.
Great, thank you, Asako, and thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the panelists. And just to mention to everybody, all the participants, if you do have questions, I think the best way to get those over to me is through the chat. So just I'll now monitor the chat box for your questions. One question that has come up is for Elsie. And it's Elsie, the question is, what is the main challenge to couple the different models among the models, so atmospheric, terrestrial, and oceanic? And you touched on that a little bit. There was that fantastic second slide that showed the different compartments at different time scales. But what are the challenges right now? Are they time? Are they money? Is it funding related? Is it data related? Just be good to have you speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think the challenges, I mean, to some extent, there are some technical challenges when you couple processes across these different timescales. I think with these modeling efforts, they're not independent of the research efforts taking place themselves. So to some extent, the modeling efforts can only be as good as the data collected to evaluate the models and understand the processes. So I think the modelers are working to capture the terrestrial cycle quite actively right now, but that's an area where we could use more work, certainly. So that's a relatively, I would say, less explored area of the global mercury cycle. And the marine mercury cycle, I think also there are some significant scientific uncertainties. I would characterize, Nicola touched on the evasion to the atmosphere. So having the appropriate constraints to really evaluate these models, and then also understanding the mechanism of methyl mercury formation microbially, I think is a really important one for linking to biota. So I would say that there's a few uncertainties, sort of key uncertainties in the science still, that would really help the models develop.
And I wonder, Elsie, just to build on that, then I'm curious, Oleg, what you too, but you mentioned in that second slide that there's a fast terrestrial was the phrase that you use. And fast terrestrial just means that there's a rapid response in the terrestrial system. The terrestrial system does include freshwater systems, I assume. And I think what that shows me that there can be a rapid response in the changes of mercury emissions and deposition on the landscape in these freshwater systems, where a lot of people do still get their food, fish, from rivers and lakes. And I'm curious if you can maybe expand on that a little bit more on that fast terrestrial sort of box that you had in that slide.
Was that for me, Dave, or for Oleg?
Yeah, that's for you, Elsie, just to build on that point slide you had. Yep.
Sure, yeah. So our research would show that the greatest enrichment occurs in those rapidly cycling organic soil pools in the environment. And of course, that rapid turnover can in fact lead to a rapid response of some ecosystems depending on what you're looking at. So certainly you can see in that diagram, we don't expect to wait, decades to centuries to see a response from a reduction in human emissions. You expect to see that response quite rapidly in both ocean ecosystems and in terrestrial ecosystems, and there's some delay in achieving the full benefit of that response, but it's not that you have to wait a very long time to see any response. And the reason these tools are useful is because you can quantify the expected temporal change in the response over time.
Yeah,
a statement, but you got my point.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I just wanted to point out the freshwater systems are so important, and we often hear that it takes forever. There's these time lags of the emissions and deposition of mercury and what that means in the environment and to us. And those time lags don't have to be decades. They are in some cases, but in other cases they aren't. They can be years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to mention we have empirical confirmation of that, Dave, from the Metallicus whole ecosystem experiment of exactly this kind of concept. Right. You see a very rapid response in fish mercury concentrations to declining or to changes in atmospheric deposition. And then you see a second phase, which is sort of a slow response from the watershed over time. So you do see that fast response. It is quite significant. And then there's a slower background response that occurs, which is overlaid with that response. And so that's experimental work rather than modeling work.
Right. Although, and another question does build on this, and I'll keep on this discussion and I'll go to others. But building on this thought, Elsie, and Metallicus is a good example, and there are other multimedia models that have looked at freshwater lakes, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. And the question is, how can we use those sort of models and observations and scale them out to more of a regional or even global sort of approach? I guess I'm sure that's something that's on your mind.
Yeah, so I think that's a great idea, and I like your idea very much of doing a sort of vulnerability assessment and selecting key ecosystem types. This is something that we did when I worked for the US EPA, where we looked at sort of characteristic lake types and their response times and their local fish communities, because doing, of course, every possible freshwater ecosystem isn't reasonable in terms of workload, but looking at across the landscape, thinking about what are the ecosystems that are most vulnerable to high methyl mercury levels based on their ecosystem characteristics and doing targeted site-specific modeling for that ecosystem, I think would be a good approach.
Good. And I'll come back to ecosystem sensitivity models. I think that is a good discussion point. But another question, maybe this is for you, Oleg, is how can we relate those more localized models to LURTAP sort of emission models, and doing that at the global level or even a regional level, let's say in Asia, is a challenge, I'm sure. But I'm sure you've thought about that. But if you can comment on that further, it'd be great.
Well, I think when you're moving from the local scale to global scale, it is a question of understanding the processes. Actually, if our understanding is more or less complete, we can easily just transport the description of the processes from the, let's say, regional to global model. But of course, we should take into account some specific features of the local transport, of the local chemistry, let's say, which could be difficult to adapt on a global scale because of this just lower resolution, special resolution, and sometimes we cannot just reproduce some small effects on this large scale modeling, in this global modeling.
And Oleg, to build on that and to also respond to a question in the chat box, what are the data that you would like to see? There are data gaps and let's focus in on Asia. And what are the data gaps that you like to see filled that would help you with your modeling purposes and linking your models to, let's say, biotic uptake?
Data gaps. Well, so I think I mentioned one of the biggest uncertainties of when we talk about atmospheric modeling. I'm not talking now about the multimedia modeling. So, but in the atmospheric modeling, one of the biggest uncertainties anthropogenic emissions still. So, and it is quite important to have quite reliable data, and in particular data on chemical speciation of anthropogenic emissions, because it highly affect on the modeling results and estimates of how much mercury going to the global scale and how much is deposited locally. And that's why this sort of uncertainty can highly affect on the results. Right. And well, probably also some more science and more measurements of exchange fluxes, and in particular in relation to climate change, could be also help of estimates of natural and secondary emissions of mercury from natural surfaces like sea surface and soil. So any local measurements and in all the areas of the globe could help of parameterizing modeling and to improve our estimates of mercury transport and mercury levels.
Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you. And to build off of that, you mentioned climate change, and I guess, Nicola, I'm thinking of us and the other networks that you're working with. And there's a question about forestry practices that makes me think also about forest fires, and climate change may have the impact in the world of increasing fires, the magnitude and the frequency. And are you set up right now for GMOS to detect that? And as you think that through, mercury emissions from forest fires that are remobilizing mercury that's in that landscape that represents years or longer, how does that play a role in how we evaluate or due to the Minamata Convention and the changes that may be related to climate change? Tough question, I know, but I'll leave it to you, Nicola.
Yeah, you just made a $1 million question.
That's right.
Okay. Well, certainly, you know, as I tried to mention in my introduction, the forest fires and the SGM are the major, you know, uncertainty point that we need to work on, because forest fire has not been, you know, we didn't pay much attention in the last few years. I feel quite uncomfortable with that, because we've been working on this to estimate forest fire using satellite data and a number of data, but there is a lot of to work on this, and this can be really, it's a very key important source. Just like FGM, we have not characterized all this, and the climate change, you know, may affect all this, because climate change may affect the frequency of forest fire, but may affect also the release of mercury from permafrost and air-water exchange from the ocean. So these are all very important sources in terms of tons per year. So we really need to focus on this. In addition to what Oleg already said, you know, we have emission inventory that they have a lot of weaknesses in terms of speciation at the emission, and also not much has been done in the last recent years to measure speciation at the different anthropogenic emission sources. And so there are several sources of uncertainty in our assessment. So I am afraid that when we evaluate the effectiveness of measures for the Minamata Convention in 6 years, 10 years' time, if we don't solve this, will be quite uncertain the outcome. Of course, we need to fill the gaps. We are doing this. There is a multilateral effort to put a passive air sampler everywhere, especially in an area where we don't have a clue what are the level of mercury in air and the deposition samples. But really, we need to work on in getting a better observational data to make sure that models, atmospheric or ocean model, can be well validated.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Nicola. And Dr. Mabata, I think you're still there. I'm curious how you feel like your station can contribute to these, to have a local sort of look that fits into regional and global efforts. What are the emissions that you're most concerned about in Southern Africa?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah. The main issue really is a lot of palm oil burning happening here where I am. I'm actually 130 kilometers north of Durban. It's full of sugarcane everywhere, and there's this time-to-time burning. And also, when you look at the example results that I showed of Gscam, you'll note there's a strong peak over the cold area in the Highveld next to Johannesburg and stuff like that. Those are type of things that we are looking at, and we know very well that the pollution here gets distributed because of stability and instability of the atmosphere. It depends. And we also know that we do have some chemistry, or for instance, CO. We have done some trajectories of CO from Congo that reach the north of this country. So there is a whole lot of mixture of what is happening here in terms of what we think will happen.
Good, thank you, Mr. Mabata. And I wonder, do you see an increase in fires in Southern Africa, either on the savanna or in the forests?
Yes, definitely. We have seen an increased frequency of fires, and some, for instance, if you go down to the Western Cape, further south, west of Cape Town, there is a lot of fire activities happening here. We also have a lot of commercial forest here. They sort of have more frequencies of fires now. If you go to this region, or not, this region is a bit wet, but if you go north from here, north of Swaziland, or west and north of Swaziland, there's a lot of forest, commercial forest there. They have seen a lot of fire activities. And also, if you go to the center of the country, recently we had one of the biggest fire events that is happening there now. So recently we have seen an increase in fire activities here.
Yeah, that's an interesting factor to build into the models, and just reading off the chat. And thank you everybody for putting your questions out there. It's very helpful. And Allison, I see your question. It's a good one. I'll throw it at you, Elsie. It's simply how do you build a model, but I think how do you know it's accurate? In that calibration process, obviously, is really key for a model. The model is only as good as the data that are used to put into it, obviously. But maybe Elsie, it'd be good to discuss the multimedia model that you're working on, and how can you build the best model, and maybe just explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about models is they're always evolving, so they're never finished. And the best model is the one that best addresses the question you're interested in answering. So if you're interested in a local issue, you can start by building a very simple model. The thing that I think a lot of our groups are doing is making all the code and the underlying data and the evaluation information available, so that if you are interested in getting involved in some of these more large-scale modeling efforts that are quite complex, they tend to be built into existing frameworks for earth science modeling. So the global scale applications are I would say, a specific field. Of course, it's an open field, so everyone is welcome to get involved. And you usually begin that modeling process by just obtaining the latest version of that model on your computer and starting to think about the questions you want to answer. I think many people who are, have more local concerns or ecosystem scale concerns are interested more in regional scale models or local ecosystem models. And there you can build your own models. Again, there are simple codes or simple tools that are available that you can download and use for that, or you can build your own simply by reading some examples of that. I'm not sure I'm answering the question, Dave, but in terms of model evaluation, I think we've heard this a few times already, which is the models, especially as you get more and more local scale, you actually require more and more. If you're trying to understand a very specific local scale process, you need a lot of local scale measurements. So the modeling and the measurements go hand in hand. And I think that's an important point that we should keep in mind for this effectiveness evaluation, which is modeling is not something that proceeds on its own. It really requires intensive involvement with all the experimental and observational scientists. And then the modeling can help identify where we have major gaps, as Nicola has been discussing a little bit today, and then can tell us how confident we are that we've filled some of those gaps, or perhaps we need more data or research in a specific area. And that could relate to a mechanism, or that can relate to a specific region.
Yeah, and I'm sure with the multimedia models, there's ways to quantify the uncertainties within that model. And that helps to identify, how much confidence you have in the model in certain places, and would also identify the new data that you'd want to fill to make that model better. But there's a quantitative way and a quantitative approach for that, right?
Yeah, there are many quantitative approaches to that. I think the other thing to keep in mind with modeling is that the models are based on, at least the types of global models that we've been talking about are based on the underlying physics and chemistry of the environment. And we compare those to observations. But if an observation is just one snapshot at one point in time, then there's also uncertainty in those observations, and there's natural variability in that. So there's an art to bringing together all the information that we have to say what do we really understand, and how confident are we when we do those kinds of uncertainty assessments.
Right, and just to talk a little bit about the ecosystem sensitivity model, it's something that we're working on here, and that I think does provide one approach to prioritize where best to set up mercury monitoring efforts. And the model is based on factors in the landscape and the waterscape that we know, collectively we as scientists know, that methylate mercury. And just for example, wetlands. Wetlands are very good areas, good habitats, good ecosystems for methylating mercury. And a little bit of input of mercury into a wetland system can cause major troubles and problems at trophic level 4 organisms. Where a lot of mercury that's put into a system that's not wet, it's dry, there's no forest, let's say an open savanna with little rainfall, a lot of mercury can put into that system and not build up in the food web because the methylating dynamics are not there to create a problem up in the food web. So just understanding those dynamics, which are challenging and difficult to do at any scale, but is something that we're working on at a global level and at different country levels, as I showed in Indonesia, to start that process of identifying where are the areas that we may be most concerned about, and then calibrating that model with actually going in and doing field assessments and understanding what mercury is in the organisms. And we can also use existing data to understand and calibrate that model too. And just using existing data from the GBIMS effort and relating that to the ecosystem sensitivity model that we continue to build and work on, there's promise that we can make those relationships and we can do it quantitatively. And just to Dave Lean had a question about forest activities and how more and more of the forest activities, let's say just timber practices. There's several papers that we've had in North America where certain timber practices release or remobilize mercury in the soils. and that release of mercury gets into the system, and if it's a system is sensitive, it can methylate that mercury, get into the food web, and cause more troubles and headaches at higher trophic levels for fisheries, for example. So as we build up this ecosystem sensitivity model, it'll incorporate some of these other factors that like timber practices. It doesn't do that now, but I think it should in the future. So I wonder if we can talk, if you can put Elsie's last slide up on the screen from her slideshow. And I thought, Elsie, you had some good thoughts and questions and recommendations of next steps. I'm putting talk on the. Hey, talk, if you, yeah, great. And if you can go to the last slide. So there was something here, Elsie, that the links to human populations in a meaningful way. I think that 1 through 7, or I forget how many numbers you have, 1 through 7 or so. That seems like that's what we're all after. And the different points along the way are contributions from what Nicola is doing from a GMOS and GAUS4M sort of standpoint, and what we're doing in regional ways like OLID is working on, and in global ways, and in local ways like Mr. Mabatha is doing on at his station and all the different stations around the world. But in the end, I think, and then linking to human populations from a freshwater system, I think is going to be easier than marine systems, but the marine systems are where most of the commercial food is entering the food system. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that linkage to human populations, and how far away are we for making those sort of relationships from a model, and the confidence that you need for those models, and what are the data points that are needed to make that link in the end? I guess that's for you, Elsie.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. I think the marine fish endpoint, if it's pelagic marine fish, so people really like to eat a lot of tuna globally, swordfish and shark and other pelagics, where even the isotope literature shows that reflects an open marine signature. Then we can employ some of these global modeling tools and make a link to those exposures. And in the fisheries communities, there's actually large databases that show the flow of those fisheries from the ocean to different regions globally. There's some data, so we can. I think we're very close to being able to say this is the mercury produced in the ocean, and the flow from fisheries to human populations globally. And what I think is uncertain is then on an individual basis how that affects a real human, because real humans have very different consumption preferences and consumption magnitudes. And if you simply run those numbers, the impacts of dietary variability is much greater than the variability that you're going to see across, say, a fish mercury concentration that's responding to a change in the environmental signature. So what that means is when you want to establish a link to a human population, you actually need local data on their consumption preferences and on the fish that they eat. And it turns out when you look in detail at some of the dietary survey data and the consumption preferences of local communities, particularly subsistence communities that tend to be most vulnerable to high mercury exposures, they do harvest a lot of local fish, and as you say, in many cases, a lot of freshwater fish or a lot of coastal fish species. So it requires a very ecosystem scale understanding. And I think I saw a question from Terry Keating earlier talking about, how do we overlay some sort of regional understanding or regional modeling on top of this global scale modeling? And I think that's why mercury is such an interesting and fun but challenging pollutant to get a handle on, because it has many global elements to the cycle, and you have to transpose those onto that local consumption and local food web accumulation. I do think we can do that, but we have to do that through detailed case studies and examples. So I think, again, Dave, your approach of targeting which populations are most vulnerable, at specifically human populations in addition to ecological populations, and then looking in detail at their dietary preferences and thinking about how they respond will be very useful for understanding the effectiveness of the convention at reducing exposures for the most vulnerable groups.
Yeah, thank you. And I think those are good starting points, and it makes me think of your slide, Nicola, about Kalimantan in Indonesia. And you saw a missions footprint there that I assume you're relating to ASGM activities, which are intense in that country. And it's interesting, in that country that provides about 40 to 50% of the tuna to the US, I believe, and about 20% for the world. So the tuna industry is intense around Indonesia and its waters. And how the releases of mercury from ASGM activities into those surrounding waters is going to be something that I think we should look at from many different ways, from modeling, from sampling in the field. But maybe you can expand a little bit more, Nicola, on those activities where you're starting to zoom in on some of these, I guess, hotspots in the world where you're seeing these high emissions, and then following up, what can we do?
Yeah, hi, David. Yeah, this is, thank you for this question. I think for a couple of years, we are thinking about the likely impact of SGM, whether this is more on global scale nature or local regional scale nature. And from preliminary evaluation that my friends in the Institute are doing, Ian Hitchcock and other people, is that our working hypothesis that most of the releases in SGM areas is primarily local or regional, doesn't travel too much, especially if you are in the tropics area. In this area, you can have really, in some cases, the case in Senegal that we were looking at, we have quite, a decent long-range transport, but still most of the deposition is still, local or almost local, of local nature. So points diffuse sources. Since this source became the first anthropogenic sources, I've been always concerned about this, and it's not clear to me at all. So also the how much mercury is discharged to the river basin from these sites is also a big question that needs deserve major attention. So in the next few years, we will work on this, and for this specific case studies that I'm sure that Ian is working on the paper, and we are refining this assessment, considering something like 10 different sites in the tropic area, but also selecting for comparison one in the northern hemisphere and one in the southern hemisphere sector. So we will see. But I think this deserves a lot of attention, especially from a policy point of view. We need to keep this in mind.
Yeah, and it strikes me, Nicola, where I'm looking at Senegal and its impact on South America, and I think linking these more intense point sources of mercury and how they relate to ecosystem sensitivity. And northern South America is very sensitive to mercury input, from what I can tell. And then you have the example in Kalimantan in Indonesia. It's another place that has quite high ecosystem sensitivity when you look at a global scale. Even at a local, and within the country itself, there's tremendous variation. But at least at a scale of at a country level, I would worry about those sort of major source types impacting the surrounding landscape. And in the end, the modeling that we're all interested in and working on here helps answer some of these questions of where do we need more monitoring to evaluate the convention's effectiveness? Do we already have data and ongoing monitoring programs there already? And then if we don't, then we may need to take those next steps and somehow find ways of gathering new information. Are there any other questions that people have? There's the good question Dave Lean just mentioned too. The good question, I don't think it's something for us to really tackle, is but it is something that comes up quite a bit, is what sort of advisory levels or thresholds do we use from a human health standpoint? There are many out there. The EPA here in the US has one they just revised. The EU has their advisory levels. WHO has theirs as well. Many countries that I've worked in through the MIA process use the EPAs, but sometimes they use the WHOs. And I don't know, I pick on you again, Elsie, just because I know you've been working on this, and it links to how much mercury is too much for people. When we do the modeling, we know mercury is in the environment everywhere, and it's in everybody, but how much is too much? And Elsie, do you have any further thoughts? Exposed.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that question. I guess my main thought of relevance to the convention is that anytime you try to implement a dietary substitution, you put the person at risk for making a choice that is more detrimental to their health than seafood. So I actually personally really don't like consumption advisories as a management strategy. Of course, we know any mercury exposure is detrimental, even if it's simply offsetting the beneficial elements of that seafood consumption. So seafood contains lots of high quality protein and micronutrients. And so any presence of methylmercury is subtracting from the benefits of that food. So I really think that's part of why the convention is so important, because the appropriate intervention from a management perspective, in my opinion, is really to reduce these global pollution sources such that that food is safe. I think it's really important for all of us to remember that a lot of the communities that are most vulnerable to very high levels of mercury exposure, and as David points out, may not have consumption advisories, they also don't have alternate food choices that are of high quality. So they're subsistence communities that rely on those food sources. So I think we probably want to defer to our WHO colleagues on this discussion, but also recognize that this is also why the convention is so important, because we as humans have contributed to very large enrichment of mercury in the environment, in all compartments of the environment. And so reducing that mercury burden is really important.
Yeah, and I agree. This is a discussion that needs to be led by WHO. There is a messaging and a management of that messaging where there's some food items that are riskier than others. And I found in some of the countries that we worked in for the MIA process, it did help to provide that sort of messaging and for countries to be able to manage their fisheries, because I agree. They have those resources. They're extremely important resources, and really it comes down to how do you manage them best for a healthy population. So it's 3 minutes left. I should just mention, do the panelists have anything else to mention or say? Everybody on the spot. If not, maybe I should turn this over to Asaku in case you have any sort of final or last thoughts.
Thank you, Dave. So I think this discussion was fascinating to the Secretariat and also to the, I believe, to the parties of the conventions, since we are working on the planning arrangements for effectiveness evaluation, and at the request of the COP, the Secretariat is working with you, Dave, and all the experts identify the parties and stakeholders to develop the monitoring guidance. And from the comments we have received from parties, they are eager to see how the monitoring data can be used using other tools such as the modeling, multimedia modeling, atmospheric modeling, to understand the effectiveness of the convention. So this discussion was very helpful for our work. So I'd like to thank you to all the panelists, and I think I would turn to Nicola, the other co-lead of the Freight and Transport Partnership, because this is a joint effort of the Secretariat, Minamata Secretariat, and the Global Multi Partnership. So I would invite Nicola to provide your closing remark.
Thank you, Isako. Yeah, I think it was very good session and a lot of thoughts and a lot of planning for future. I think we briefly discussed and identified major gaps and where we need more knowledge and improvement in our understanding of different patterns that brings Mercury from sources to biological endpoint and impact on ecosystem and human health. The atmospheric component, as has been said extensively during this afternoon, is the more advanced component in the whole Mercury cycle. So we need a lot of effort also in other compartments for the ocean and terrestrial cycling, and also we need to increase our effort, this multilateral effort to fill the gaps of our monitoring capability. And I'm referring to atmospheric monitoring, but not only. We need also to promote a lot of monitoring in the specific sites for specific case study that deserve major attention. And certainly SGM, ocean emission, fire, forest fires, these are all interlinked, and climate change is on the top of everything, and that can affect different processes. So from scientific point of view, it's quite interesting and quite challenging to fill these gaps and to improve our knowledge through research and international cooperation. So that's, I think that is for the benefit of all parties involved in the Minamata Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. So I think we are going to close this session, and we look forward to working further with the partnership and ICMGP and all the partners to bridge the scientific community and the policy making community. Thank you very much.